And you see a lot of kids start then getting into drugs and that kind of stuff because they're extremely bored.
Wow. And did that happen for you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So to Japan and just rocked up with this backpack and this sleeping bag, stepped over the threshold, which is this massive wooden gate, 330-year-old wooden samurai temple built by the samurai clan, just like something out of a movie. Like I can't even explain how incredible this place is.
No better way to step in episode 7 than by having the resilient Ed Barton on the show. Ed's contrasting childhood led him on a seesaw of deconstructed life adventures, from straight A's to losing his brother and almost himself to drugs. Ed's life views were challenged by combining psychotherapy and psychedelics, opening not only himself, but a world of possibilities. From 6 years in China before hitting a personal rock bottom, to fluent in a language and then becoming an interpreter for the British Embassy. Though impressive, his climb back to the top was met with crippling social anxiety and medication. A change of heart moved him from government desk job to lucrative remote online work, where he traded addressing diplomats in conference halls for loose getaways in Vegas and champagne at the front of the plane. At this point, the only thing slowing Ed down was 3.5 years in a Japanese monastery. This story has it all, as it showcases a true example of human introspection and what can be achieved and overcome because of it. I'll be sharing my reflections after the podcast, but until then, sit back and enjoy the path of Ed Barton. All right, Ed, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, man. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Let's take it back to the beginning. Where did you grow up?
I grew up between Southampton and Portsmouth, which is right on the south coast in England.
Wow.
Yeah.
What was that experience like?
I would say the first 4 or 5 years were positive. And then my life kind of hit its first big turning point when we moved from there. We moved into like a very rural area. So that was like one of the first big turning points in my life, really.
Was there a specific reason for the move?
Yeah, so my dad had got a job up there. He worked in special needs, and he was the deputy head of a special needs school. And then they offered him a step up in his career, which would mean him taking over as head teacher of a special needs school. So it was up in Gloucestershire. And yeah, there's a whole backstory to that I can get into a little bit, but it's basically a very isolated area. And where we had grown up before, we were on like a housing estate, had lots of friends, lots of kids. So it was like quite an idyllic kind of wholesome start. Those first sort of 4 or 5 years, living in a normal semi-detached house, brothers riding BMXs and stuff out on the grass and playing with their friends and stuff like that. And then because of the move with the job, my dad uprooted his family and we moved into basically the middle of nowhere. Wow. So that had a lot of knock-on effects for me and my brothers as well.
And did you ever feel like you settled there, or how was that actual transition for you?
I mean, it's always been quite difficult, man. I mean, I moved out of the UK when I was sort of 21, now 45. So I've spent the last 24 years abroad. And part of that is because of a kind of a difficult relationship with what you would call home, you know? Yeah. So that's always been a contentious issue in a way, like the relationship with where I grew up. It was a difficult area.
And what was the demographic like in the more rural area, and the behavioural patterns of the kids and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, it was weird, you know. I mean, it was a very small village. So I went to a school with about 100 kids in it. And I think growing up, you don't really notice there's anything too wrong. You just have very small friend groups and stuff. Do you know what I mean? We lived in like a valley, which was just surrounded by fields. When growing up, there was a shop, there was a hairdresser, a post office. But then as things changed in the UK economy, those things shut down. And then there was actually pretty much nothing left in the village. So I would say it's like rural deprivation in a way. Growing up, had your little friend group and that was fine. And then the problems really started around teenage years, because you want to go to parties and you want to do different stuff. You want to chase girls, have a social life, and living in that area, you got to drive 3 miles to go to a shop, or so if you're not driving, you can't really do anything. And you see a lot of kids start then getting into drugs and that kind of stuff because they're extremely bored.
Wow. And did that happen for you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, um, I guess, you know, it would be important to sort of mention I'm the youngest of three brothers. So my oldest brother, I was 5 when we moved to the countryside, and um, there was a whole kind of saga around that. Like my parents' marriage was already on the rocks, but I didn't realize that. So he had been leaving the family to go and um, he'd been leaving the family from our original home in Southampton, near Southampton, to go up and spend time at this school that he was going to transition to. And he wasn't keeping in touch with my mum. I don't know if he was seeing another woman up there at that time. There was some recollection of that. But anyway, their relationship was like very, very strained. So I was 5. My other brother was like 8, and then my oldest brother was 12. We moved up there, and we didn't actually have a house to move into. They sold the old house, so then there was 5 of us living out of a caravan while they're looking for a place to live. And at this point, like there's just like daily arguments, talk about divorce, talk about breaking up. So we're in a caravan. My parents are talking about breaking up all the time. Things are not particularly stable. So I started my primary school from the caravan. We didn't actually have a home at that point, which felt weird. So already I've gone from this like super secure home base, you know, carpet on the floor, nice little modern semi-detached house, brothers playing outside on the bikes, to now we're all living in a caravan, and my mum's screaming at me, telling me I need to choose who I'm going to live with between my dad and my mum. So started to get super insecure around that age. And then the transition was like very, very hard on my oldest brother. He had his own issues, and he never settled properly. He never got established in this new area. And that was kind of like a continual downward trajectory for him. So he started, I mean, I guess he was ideating about suicide, because he would come home from school and he had drawn like a little dotted line on his wrist with the scissor symbols of like cut here, you know, cut here kind of thing. And he was like 13 years old when he was doing this kind of stuff. And that kind of foreshadowed what actually happened to him sort of like 13 years later. So he started to run with the wrong crowd, started to like go around and smash stuff up in this little village, just get into trouble, you know, like delinquent stuff. And then that kind of came to a head when he actually burglarized a house, which was the house of a police officer who lived in the village. And my parents' marriage was extremely strained at that point anyway. So they actually called up social services and were like, you know, we can't handle this kid. And he was a big guy. He was like 6'3", even like when he was this age, very tall teenager. My dad would be out working. My mum would try and stop him going out and running with his little group of mates. And he would sort of be like physically like squaring up to my mum as if he's going to like punch her in the face, be like, you're not going to stop me going out. So this kind of stuff was just going on a daily basis. And so they basically asked social services to take him off their hands, sort of like as a, try and teach him a lesson basically, because they didn't know what to do with him when he was like 15. So he went into a care home for troubled teenagers. And then basically he was a very stubborn guy. And he was like, you know, fuck you, I'm not coming back. And then he got into drugs more heavily there. So at that point, I didn't really see my brother on a consistent basis. Like I was 8 years old and he was 15. So he went into this care home. And then in the end, he got fostered out to a different family. And then he got into harder and harder drugs. And then eventually he came back for different periods to the house. And then he also introduced me to drugs. And then that kind of set its own trajectory off. But yeah, ultimately that move started a very bad sequence of events for him. And then he ended up dying when he was like 26 from a heroin overdose. And that kind of all, I mean, it's hard to say where that all started, right? But he never got established. He was never thriving. It was just all downhill for him from the moment that we moved to that new area as well, really.
Wow. And having that age gap, were you aware consciously that this was happening to him, or was this something you kind of figured out later down the track?
I didn't know exactly what was going on for him. I just knew that he was troubled. He was very disturbed, and he would like take that out on me. He would take that out on the family pet. You know, we had a puppy which he abused. Like, you know, he would like stub cigarettes out on it, throw it in the lake. Like, animal abuse basically. And then he would chase me around with knives and shit like that. He would publicly chase my friends around with knives. And then he had trouble with the police for carrying concealed weapons. And, he would often have like a knife with him. And I didn't really know what was going on with him. I didn't like him, because he would like pin me down and beat me up. And so I remember a switch going in my head, like when he actually got put into foster care, I was like, right, I'm not going to speak to this guy. Like, he's the enemy now. So I didn't understand what was going on with him. I didn't like him. He wasn't an easy guy to like. And he would steal, a lot from within the house, steal from the family. He would wait behind on my birthday and my brother's birthday to steal the money that was coming through with the birthday cards. And like, we would find out later because my mum fell out with family and friends and was like, why don't you even send anything for the kids anymore? And they're like, what are you talking about? We've been sending money for years. And that's because my brother was staying behind, opening the birthday cards, taking the cash, going and buying drugs. So, it was hard to like him at that point, and I didn't really understand what was going on. I knew we weren't normal. I knew the family was kind of like falling apart. And, I've heard on other guests talk about on your podcast that sense normalcy was what I wanted. I remember like fantasizing about a normal house, a company car, and just, like a normal life.
So how did you navigate those teenage years for yourself?
Very good question. By adopting, so my brother was very much the black sheep, and then I had a middle brother who's like the forgotten child, and then I just transformed myself into the uber golden boy persona. Because before that, in my younger years, I'd been in a lot of trouble because I was emotionally disturbed. Looking back, I realized I was emotionally disturbed. The head teacher of my school would always be calling me out and calling me into her office about bullying and verbal abusing other kids, physically beating them. And she was like, I don't know what I'm going to do with you. And so I was acting out at that stage. And I was in a lot of trouble myself. And, in hindsight, I can see it's because I was being emotionally and physically and verbally abused at home. So then I was just repeating what had been done to me by my brothers and my mum, basically. So I was kind of a tearaway and a kind of, a bit of trouble, always talking in class. I think there was like elements of ADHD and stuff as well, bad behavior, bullying, all this kind of stuff. And then once I got up to secondary school, I got called out a couple of times very, very severely by teachers up there. And I was like, boom, just something flicked in my head. And I was like, right, I'm just going to go all in and just like be Mr. Golden Bollocks. So that became my persona. And that's what gave me security and like validation. I was like the rugby captain. I played for the county, played for the district, became the top track and field athlete, got the best results in my exams for high school out of the male students. So I just dedicated myself completely to being perfect. Like I felt like I had to be perfect at that point.
Wow. And what was the reception like for the people around you watching this switch flip and this transformation?
Yeah, so I remember one of the kids that I always used to get in trouble with, he came by my house because he had gone to a different secondary school and he must have been like 12. And he was like, so what's going on with you now? I spoke to Steve, and he says like, you're a straight A student now. And I was like, yeah, we can't really hang around. And he was just like, this old mate of mine was like, what the hell? Like, that's bizarre. So it was a massive transformation. And, it was very, very extreme. I literally would go and sit by myself at the back of classes and just not talk to anybody. And was like, I'm such a bad person that I obviously, upset these people and bully them without myself realizing. So I just need to just lock in, and I would just work by myself. I just went really like 0 to 100, complete switch. But yeah, I think old friends from primary school, like that guy was surprised. And then, people around me, they didn't necessarily know what to make of it, but it was obvious that I was just like locked in on my own transformation at that point.
And so when you would achieve a certain result, how would that feel for you at the time?
Oh, it was completely soothing, man. I remember like very specifically, there was a time I was in my bed and I remember looking at the wall and it had all my accolades on there, like all my certificates, all my golds, because I would win the swimming, I would win the 400, the 800. And I remember looking at that I'd just come back from playing a county game up in the Midlands for rugby. And I remember looking at that wall of those accolades and thinking, I'm a good person. And like saying that to myself, like now I know, like I'm a good person. And like that helps me to like, then I could go to sleep with a clear conscience. Because prior to that, I was just racked with a lot of guilt and all kinds of stuff, man. I felt a lot of shame from the family and surrounding myself with, golden certificates. This was a way of like showing myself that I was okay and I was a good person now, and trying to like erase some of the dirt from the past in a way.
Wow. And what was your relationship like with your parents, with all these golden accolades around you?
Yeah, so that was then I was getting love and praise from them, at that point. And I feel like in hindsight, I realized I was giving them really what they needed, because at that point, my brother hadn't died at that point, but he was still kind of off the radar, living in different places. And he would turn up homeless sometimes and then have to come back like completely emaciated because he was shooting heroin and everything else he could get. So for them, I think it was very important because they were like, we've got one functioning son. And I think subconsciously I was trying to compensate for them,
Absolutely. And at this point in time, what was happening with your middle brother?
Good question. Like we were on parallel tracks, and it was funny because we came together when we started smoking weed together when I was like 16 and he was 19. And we started to compare notes, and he was like, no way, like we've been living the same life, but in separate bedrooms. Because we didn't really speak. It was, he had a massive amount of resentment towards me. He used to call me the cuckoo. So I think he saw me as like an invader who kind of pushed him out. And the only real contact I would have with him was like, he would just kick open my bedroom door sometimes, come in, smash up like my stereo to like turn it off, and then just walk out because he was revising for exams and I was younger. So we had a very dysfunctional, estranged relationship until we started smoking weed together, and that brought us together. And that actually formed the basis for a different relationship, a more healthy relationship. And we got very close over the years after that. But yeah, it was within our house, there was a lot of people sort of living separate, isolated lives. It was quite strange.
Wow. And so when you started smoking weed, were you still able to maintain that high standard of success?
No, not at all. So what happened is I completely fell off. Like when I was 15, so I'm a kind of person that goes between extremes, right? So I went from like primary school tearaway, like because I was big physically, I was like the big bully, the problem kid. Then I became Mr. Perfect, Mr. Golden Balls. And then I started to smoke weed. And then in those days it was hash. You would buy it and it was bad stuff. It was mixed with all kinds of stuff. Like you would light it and it would kind of set fire because there's like bits of plastic and paraffin and stuff in there. Like anyone who knows 1990s soap bar, it was bad stuff. It was called soap bar because it'd be pressed into these 9 bars like this. So we would be smoking it. And the area that I grew up in, there was no moderate. It was like the kids that smoked it, if you smoked, like they smoked a lot, like very intense. And it wouldn't just be like a spliff. You would put it in something called a bottle bag, which is like a vacuum device that you make out of an old wine bottle with a plastic bag on it. And you can put a big amount of hash in there. And then when you inhale it all in one go. So it's like the most extreme, harshest way to smoke hash. And we'd be like, I was late into the game because the kids in my school, they started like 12 years old, 12, 13. I held off because I was Mr. Perfect until I was like 15. And then I finally succumbed. Because there's a lot of peer pressure. I saw the boys that were like selling drugs and smoking drugs, they were getting the girls. And, I was 15 at that point and all your hormones are changing and stuff. And I was like, well, I don't want to just be this like, nerdy student who's top athlete, top of the rugby team and whatever. So you start seeing what's going on. And I remember knocking on my oldest brother had come back to stay home for a while. And I was like, what's a bottle bag? And then he was actually, I remember it happened because he was pulling a bottle bag when I came in. And I was like, what's that? And he showed me like how he does it, and I was like, okay, that's interesting. That sort of sat with me. And then one day I went back and was like, can I smoke a bottle bag with you? And he was like, are you sure you want to do that? And I was like, yeah. So then started smoking hash with my oldest brother, because he was back for a bit. So I was 15 and he was like 22 or something at that time. And I mean, he smoked a lot. He used to smoke a half ounce a week. So I went from 0 to 100, and all my grades started to fall apart. You know, I'd be walking around, my eyes were completely red. And I remember my mum stopped me one time. She was like, "Look at your eyes." And I was like, "Oh no." She was like, "They're so red." And I was like, I thought I was busted. And she was like, you got to take it easy. You're pushing yourself too hard. You know, my dad would find me passed out on the bed and think I was just tired from studying. But all my grades started to fall off. And they even called a whole school assembly about how certain people were influencing top students into the world of drugs, which I found very patronizing as well, because, you know, I had my own backstory. It's not like I was living in an ivory tower. I was living at home with a heroin addict, and I could have accessed that anytime I wanted, you know. But anyway, there was it was a big deal. Me getting into drugs was a big deal because I was meant to be like the top student. Well, I was, you know, their best hope for the best grades. So what happened is I did a last minute kind of like triage where I tried to like repair and I just went really hard in the revision process and managed to scrape it back. And then got my results and then went straight back into the drugs. Like once I'd got my GCSEs.
Wow.
And then I continued to fall off, and then I started to fall off harder and harder and harder.
Wow.
But I was so scared of being branded in that way and like throwing away the hard work I'd done for my GCSEs. That really scared me. So there was a good few months before the exams where because I was like 15, I was already doing speed and like mushrooms and hash at that point, and I just stopped taking anything and just like studied for the exams and then got really good results.
Wow. Because you've had such dichotomy between the two, those ages, which one felt more natural?
It's hard to say, man. I think they're both part of me, you know, because like the drugs, I mean, the first time I tried hash, the first time I didn't get any real, but the first time it really hit for me, this thing went in my head because I'd been living with anxiety for so long and I didn't even realize. And this is where I think the danger of addiction is for people with anxiety. And this is what happened to my brother, my mum, and my cousin. And, you know, there's a history of anxiety and addiction in my family. Because you're not able to switch off or give yourself any sense of relaxation, when an external source does that for you, like when I would smoke a bottle bag and just sit back in the chair, and I remember this voice, I was like, this is me. Like this, I was like, this is your thing. And then I quickly started to form an identity around that as well. I went 0 to 100. So I started to get ounces from my brother and sell it. I bought every smoking contraption, like vaporizer, but I had all these different bongs and stuff. And then I built an identity around that because I was just so into it. I was like, this is my thing. And I was like, I was just in love with it, you know, because it gave me something that was so important, which was like relaxation. And so it's hard to say, you know, like I felt great when I was achieving. I felt great when I was playing sports. I also felt great when I was stoned, you know. And so I think in a way they were both, me really.
Wow. And so once you got the result you were looking for, you pulled it all together.
Yeah.
Then what happened then after high school?
Then after high school, so I went away on a trip to Bali, came back, and that's when, so we started doing A-levels, and that's when it was more like amphetamine and ecstasy and that stuff all started, you know. And that, I mean, and these are things that I wouldn't trade for anything, because like discovering MDMA and ecstasy has like been a hugely transformational experience for me. You know, I think it's amazing. I think they have a place as well as a kind of like a modality as well, like a healing modality. And there's, you know, there's medicinal applications for MDMA for sure. So, so what happened is I got more into like the music scene, more into, just still smoking a lot of weed, but then psychedelics as well, like magic mushrooms, more trips to Amsterdam, like big amounts of mushrooms, salvia, you know, just different stuff. And then, but right around that age when we were doing our A-levels in the UK, you know, it's like age 17, 18, it would just be Friday night, go around a friend's house, double drop a couple of E's, listen to music with your friends. Amazing times. But it escalated, you know, like it just escalated. And I would say, you know, cannabis is a gateway drug, because once you break your seal, that's like a threshold. I'm not going to do any drugs. Then you do that, then it's so much easier to pick up whatever comes around. So it escalated then. And then, you know, I found, so from like 17, 18 was like amphetamine and ecstasy. No, 16 was like amphetamines, mushrooms, 17, 18, ecstasy. And then 18 was cocaine, and then 19 was crack cocaine. Like that was the first. I got involved with some people down in Bristol, and they were like, they were hooking me up with reasonably big amounts of ecstasy to sell, and then they were crackheads, basically, like alcoholics and crackheads, much older than me. I was 19, they were 40, and they would take us, to the front line in St. Paul's, which was the main drugs area. And it was crazy. That was also a crazy experience and very exciting. At that time, it was Jamaican yardies would come over, and it was a free-for-all open-air drugs market where you would drive your car in, 10 yardies would jump on your car, you'd just wind down your window, like you'd tell them 5 white, and then they would just they'd just spit out the drugs, throw them in the car, and just numbers on bits of cardboard, because it was all like Nokia cell phones back then, throw in their numbers in, and then you just take your money, poke the money out, drive off. And it's like, it's insane. That stuff doesn't exist anymore. People sell, don't do it in that way, I guess, but it was wild, for a 19-year-old coming from the countryside and then going to this thing. It's like, then drive back to this guy's house, and then you'd have like a weekend session just smoking rocks. And yeah, I thought that was amazing. I'd be hypocritical if I was like, oh, it's really bad. At that time, it was an amazing experience. And again, I enjoyed that period in a lot of ways.
Wow. And what were you doing? Was that your sole kind of income and way of providing, and you were just kind of getting swept up within that whole scene itself?
So at that time, I had a job where I would collect the golf balls off a driving range by driving the little cart around, and it would like spin out. So that brought me some money in. The drugs that I sold, it was more just to finance my own drugs. Like I would bring crack back, and I would like sell 4 rocks and get a free rock for myself. But the ease, we would sell, like we would get a bag of 100 and then divvy them up and sell them. I mean, it didn't really occur to me, but it's quite dangerous. Like at that age, if we'd got pulled over, we had like, you've got an 8-ball of crack and then you've got 100 pills. If you get pulled at that point, that's possession with intent to supply. But I mean, I wasn't doing like big quantities or big numbers. It was just really to find, like, to get a bit of extra drugs for myself.
Wow. And so within that experience, was there a moment that you kind of had a bit of an awakening, or you kind of saw your own actions and behavior and kind of questioned it?
In terms of stopping drugs?
Yeah.
No, the only thing that stopped me taking drugs was weed started to give me anxiety. And I remember one specific point, a friend that I used to do drugs with at university, he came round, and I even found a crack dealer at university. So like there was a guy from London who was selling crack to students, which is a bizarre career move. But so we would still smoke crack at university sometimes, but not in a big way. And then I found for some reason, like weed, instead of alleviating my anxiety, actually used to give me anxiety. And there was this one point where this friend came around and we all passed a spliff round, and then the atmosphere in the room just like got so uncomfortable. And I spoke to my housemates and was like, what was that all about? And they're like, yeah, what's the point of even doing this? Like, we're smoking a spliff. And then everybody just goes silent. And I'm just saying to them, like, I was happier before I smoked that joint. And they were like, yeah, me too. And I'm like, well, why are we even doing this? So overnight, like, again, very extreme, completely knocked smoking weed on the head. Like, this is my second year of university. So I was like 21 years old. And then I just never wanted to touch weed again. And pretty much I never have since then, Other things still carried on, but yeah, I stopped smoking weed at that point. And then later on, all the other drugs stopped when I stopped drinking alcohol, because that was always the catalyst. And I was talking to somebody earlier about a motorbike accident I had in Bali in like 2018, where I came off my motorbike quite badly. And I was like, because I was drunk driving, I was very drunk driving this like dirt bike, and could have ended so much worse. And then that was the wake up call, when I was like, you've got to stop doing this stupid shit, because you're gonna hurt you. There was a massive let off, like I was just driving around, flip flops, board shorts, t-shirt, in the dark, going from one bar to the next. Somebody clipped my handlebars, sent me into a spin. I ended up like splitting my toes, breaking my toe, 20 stitches in my foot, and in bed for a couple of weeks, like all this scarring and stuff. And luckily, but it could have been so much worse. My head just kind of like grazed the tarmac, and I had a couple of stitches in my scalp, But if I'd gone down hard, you know, that would have just completely opened my head up, you know, brain damage or killed me. So I took that as a real let off and a wake up call of like, you know, the universe letting me know I was very lucky.
Wow. I mean, it sounds incredible that when you put your mind to something, you're incredibly strong-willed.
Yeah, that's exactly, yeah. Like, and that's something that comes from my mum and sort of like slightly OCD type tendencies. If I get fixated on something, then I'll just do it. You know, if it's running a marathon or doing a half Ironman or whatever it is, I just get an idea in my head and then I'll do it.
So as an example, like say during that period where you are consuming a lot and you're just enjoying yourself, did you kind of have in the back of your mind, oh, well, if this gets to a point, I'll just change it up because you had that willpower?
No, I don't think I ever thought that. And I think the other thing that I didn't really touch on is actually like when I was going down to Bristol and I was smoking crack every weekend and in that time, I remember I was really like quite tortured internally. And I remember just, there was so much stuff going on in my head. And obviously the drugs were making it all so much worse, especially doing like speed and stuff like that. And, you know, the weed definitely changed my way of thinking. And in hindsight, when I look back at my drug use then, it was very much like an attempt to self-destruct, or it was total self-sabotage. And my brother overdosed in August of year 2000. So I literally seen him in an open casket, like one of the most shocking things that you'll see, you know, laid out and all preserved and just looking completely freakish. And then, you know, like shortly after that, me and my brother were like, just, you know, let's go and get some rocks, and just like not connecting the two at all of like, you know, you've got an addict in the family who's just OD'd. And then we're just still trying to do ourselves in, really. Like my self-esteem was absolutely rock bottom, had so much just negative thoughts, negative beliefs, like, just my view on the world, you know, like it's just so bleak. Yeah, kind of crazy talking about it now, because there was a line in The Matrix where he talks about the human race being like a virus that consumes like, as if, you know, like when mold gets onto an orange and it just eats it up. And I had that viewpoint. I was like, people are like a virus. The world's such a dark place with just this tiny little, you know, ball like floating in infinity. And I had such, you know, my worldviews was so dark at that time. It's quite funny to think back to that.
Wow. And so when you've now made the decision, you've stopped smoking weed, you've reflected, like, also to clarify, what were you studying at university?
I was doing Southeast Asian studies.
Wow.
Because I went on a trip to Indonesia and that blew my mind. So I didn't have any long-term plan. I just knew I loved Southeast Asia. So I was like, I'm going to do Southeast Asian studies. And at that point, when I came back from traveling, I had this attitude of like, I'm a traveler, I don't want to study. My dad's like, yeah, cool story, bro, but we've got a bit of money that we can use for your education. You're going to have to take it now. And he was like, why don't you get trained as a teacher and do a B.Ed? And I was like, I don't want to be a teacher. I'm from a family of teachers. And I was like, I'll do Southeast Asian studies. So I didn't have a clue. I was following my interest, you know, following my passion.
Great. And so did you finish off the studies there in the UK?
I did, man. Yeah. So that was like my first awakening, actually, that happened at university. So my academic studies weren't a success. Like I almost dropped out because of my social anxiety. I was struggling so much to even be on campus. There was, you know, just the crowds of people coming from a tiny little village in the countryside, then going up to a big city where there's like 20,000 international students walking all over the campus. I couldn't even handle that. And then I was doing speed on a daily basis there because that was the drug of choice in the north of England. So I was doing a lot of amphetamine, getting low key kind of like amphetamine psychosis because I wasn't sleeping, and just like not in a good place at all mentally, age sort of 19, 20. And then a massive turning point was one of my closest friends, like big shout out to Matt Ryan. He came by my house one day, and he was actually the guy that also introduced me to Buddhism. So he's always been like a very big influence in my life. And he came by the student house and he said, I was like, what are you up to? Where have you been? He was like, I just came back from a counseling session at the university. And I was like, what are you talking about? And he was like, psychotherapy, you can get psychotherapy. And I was so closed-minded at this point. I remember we were having this conversation on the porch of the house. And I was like, keep your voice down, man. Like, why are you talking about mental health in public, you know? And he's like, don't be stupid. You can go up there and, you know, as a student, you can access free psychotherapy and mental health support. He was like, of anyone, you should go, you know? And I never considered, I didn't even know that this was a thing. And then like I booked myself in, and like, you know, the pretext was like the bereavement. You know, I was like, well, my brother's died. I was sort of rationalizing it to myself. Like, I'm not crazy. I don't want to go and see a psychotherapist. You know, and I was like, okay, yeah, well, I can tell them my brother died, and that will be a good foot in the door. That will give me a legitimate reason to go and see them. And that just like, that was one of the first massive turning points in my life, and has definitely influenced a lot of who I am right now as a person. Like, so much changed from that.
Isn't it fascinating that you felt like you had to have a solidified reason to even have the beginning of the
for sure, yeah. And again, you know, thinking how open I am, and, you know, talking with friends and other people about these issues now, and encouraging other young men to do the same. It's interesting as I retell this story to think like how scared, you know, how uncomfortable I was with the idea of talking about anything about mental health. You know, like, that was not an okay conversation to have.
What was a misconception that was broken in that experience that you had around talking to somebody and what you actually witnessed firsthand?
Do you mean in terms of like my experience of psychotherapy and how that changed things for me, or?
Yeah, and taking that first step. And
yeah, so well, it was just the process itself. Like, as soon as I got a taste of it, I was like, this is fucking amazing. Like, because I'm kind of an adventurer, and then like to be in this room and be able to say anything to this like random guy that I don't even know, I was like, this is giving me an adrenaline high. So I was getting a real buzz from it. It was incredible, and I still, you know, really value that kind of space where you can do that kind of stuff. So yeah, very quickly. So I might have gone in there like with all this stigma and like, you know, self-consciousness, like, don't want anyone seeing me go into the student services building and stuff. But like, very quickly I was like, oh, this is awesome, man. You know, and like it gelled with me very well, because I have, naturally I'm an open person, and then having these conversations, I was like, oh, this is amazing. Yeah. Wow. Because I just didn't know you could do that, you know? Yeah,
definitely. And just to paint the picture, what year was this?
This was year 2000, and let me see, it'd be like 2002. Yeah, I think 2002 or 2003.
Yeah. Wow. So
I was like 21, 22 at that point.
Amazing. Very early days, particularly with the mental health.
Yeah, really. Yeah.
Amazing. So then what happened after that?
So I was assigned an amazing counselor called Steve, and you know, sitting in this like 1970s like style beige, because it was just a 1970s uni, sitting in this little office. He just comes in, you know, he's like, so what brings you here, whatever. And then just like, yeah, I felt like I was exploring my own mind outside of myself in real time with another human being. I was like, oh, this is kind of like tripping, you know, this is amazing. This is so cool. So we're doing that. And then one session, he said to me, have you ever heard of Thich Nhat Hanh? And I was like, no, I don't even know. I remember those three words sounding so strange to me. He was like, Thich Nhat Hanh. I was like, what's a Thich Nhat Hanh? And he wrote it down. He's like, I recommend that you look for some books by him. So this whole period of my life really felt like a treasure hunt. I was picking up these little breadcrumbs and following the white rabbit like further and further down this path. And it was super exciting. Like my mind, I definitely had like an awakening of sorts, because I was doing a lot of I was doing a lot of mushrooms, psychotherapy, and I discovered Zen at the same time. So those three things like really kind of like blew my mind open very quickly. And that's an amazing thing when I think of like the karmic connections to bring those three things together into this like trifecta, like perfect storm. So he sends me off with this instruction to find a book by Thich Nhat Hanh. So I go into the secondhand bookshop. And again, the guy that introduced me to psychotherapy, Matt, he was a massive reader. He was a super interesting guy, like nothing like the friends I had in my little village. He was like a really like open-minded experimental Jewish guy from East London. He'd been doing meditation at the Bethnal Green Buddhist Center since he was like 16. He was into all this stuff that I had no idea about, like Kierkegaard and postmodernism and Jackson Pollock, like all this modern art and like all these ideas and stuff that, you know, he sort of absorbed from London and stuff. He was just like one of the most expansive, like free thinkers I'd ever met at that point in my life. And he was like, oh, there's this secondhand bookshop, you should go. So I went there and I found it was a commentary on the Heart Sutra by Thich Nhat Hanh, which is like the best of all Thich Nhat Hanh books I could have possibly found at that point. And that's when I started to see that everything was interconnected, you know, and he talks about how when you're eating the satsuma, you're eating the rays of the sun and you're eating the toil of the farmers and, you know, the food that the farmer's wife has put on the plate for him and the soil, and everything is interconnected. And I'm like, boom, 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 like can feel my mind changing in real time as I read this book. And that, you know, that is on my list to this day of like transformative books. But so it started with that. And then that led to like Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. Sorry, I'm skipping bits, but then so Matt gave me this. My mate Matt would feed me books that he's finished with. He's like, I've finished this amazing book, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. You should try it. Or before that, it was On the Road, you know, by Jack Kerouac. And so he's like chucking me these books that he's finished with because he's just like voracious. He just like plows through these books, man. Fastest reader I've ever known. And then, you know, so I'm like, who's Jack Kerouac? Start reading about him. Oh, he's like a beatnik who's into Buddhism and Zen. And then like Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance comes along. In the back, he's recommended Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. So I go to the secondhand bookstore and boom, like, hey presto, they've got Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. I'm like, what is like, how come everything I need is just like coming on hand, you know, like right when I need it. So I'm starting to, all these things are starting to lead to Zen. And I'm doing like, still doing mushrooms a couple of times a week at that time. And that also came from a calling because my experiences with magic mushrooms when I was younger was pretty terrifying because I was in a dark place mentally. So everything would be like very scary, like really. It was not fun trips, but we would do them out of ego because that's what everyone was doing. And then I got this call, I got this voice from my intuition of like, you're in such a positive state of mind. Like if you took the mushrooms now, you'd have an amazing time. And then another huge coincidence is that at that time, you could actually get magic mushrooms legally in head shops. They would sell them in a cloth bag and it said, this is a sleep aid, put it under your pillow and it'll help you sleep. And it's like, yeah, or if you cut it open, there's 2.5 grams of Mexican mushrooms in there ready dried. So I was like, this is amazing. So everyone's doing shrooms because it's legal. So start taking shrooms again, having amazing experiences, like really beautiful, like so fun. And that voice of my intuition, I was like, fuck yeah, I knew I was in the right place to start doing this again. So then my counseling sessions with Steve start to be like talking about the trip and talking about these insights and what's happening in my new meditation practice. And I remember this one point, like I started having really interesting insights and the way that I saw stuff was really changing. And I remember this one session with him, he said, your mind is expanding so quickly, like you need something to make sure that you're still grounded, you know, like make sure you don't get untethered because obviously with the work that you're doing and the psychedelics and everything, things are changing really quickly for you. And I could feel that, like I could definitely feel that. And then when I finished this little 6-week program with him, I was obsessed with psychotherapy and I was like, there should be counselors in every school. Like I wanted, you know, every student pretty much wants to change the world. And I still want to change the world now. And I had this realization, if we're going to change the world, it has to be by one person's mind at a time. And that would best be done by catching kids early on, have them be able to articulate their thoughts and their inner feelings. And we should have more counseling in schools, which I still stand by now. I think that'd be a great way to improve the world. But that seed then went into my head of like, I want to be some kind of a therapist, basically. Like I wanted to be a therapist. And then I did pursue that training sort of 16, 17 years later. At the same time, I'd also been reading books by people who had become monks in Japan. And I just had this like very clear intention, had already gone into my head. I was like, I'm going to do that. And that is also something that came to fruition later on as well. But had these kind of two realizations at this point. I want to be a therapist and I want to be a Zen monk. And I kind of am. I was one and I kind of am doing that work now. So the seed went in when I was like 21. And then took sort of 17 years to, you know, to mature.
Incredible. I mean, what a turn in directions.
Yeah, yeah.
In life path. And then also too, as you said, following the breadcrumbs.
Yeah, amazing.
And like really connecting with the signs and the right people around you and how that influence really just, as you know, the counsellor said, expanding your mind at such a rapid rate.
Yeah. And
then finding grounding within it. And then once those seeds were planted, I mean, how did you water those seeds and how did they eventually grow?
Yeah. It's a good question. And, you know, the interesting thing is as well, because I've looked back on this and told my stories in some of my own videos and talked with clients about it. and it wasn't linear either. There was like this massive expansion early on, like in my third year of university, you know, so I was like 22 at that time. I was like 22. So it's this like big spiritual awakening basically, because I was definitely having insights as well from my Zen practice and stuff. I don't want to overblow it, but like, you know, like definitely my view on everything had changed really in my view on things, like seeing stuff so interconnected. I was so much more full of love and like huge difference. Then I went away to teach English in China with this government scheme where the British Council, they send 120 fresh grads over to China to teach in schools all around China. And when I look back on that period as well, that was kind of like a bit of a contraction, because I went there with my Thich Nhat Hanh books and I was trying to keep a bit of a meditation practice going, but there was a lot of drinking. It was like, you know, the way that our Chinese host would socialize with us then, it was all drinking and smoking. There was a bit of drug use available, like some ecstasy in the clubs in China and stuff. So I got back into a lot of drinking out there. And then without realizing it, and this is what I talk to my clients about, like you got to be careful of avoidance, because it can be very sneaky how it starts to slip back into your life. And I started to feel very comfortable in China because I wasn't around other Westerners and feeling like they would be judging me, or I had to, you know, speak on a certain level with them. It was very easy just to be like, oh, he's the celebrity white monkey boy, you know, and like, you know, they would wheel you out at dinner parties and then make you do a toast and say a couple of lines of Chinese or something like that. So I realized it started to become a bit of an avoidance behavior to actually just be in this comfort zone in China. And as that went on, I actually got worse and worse, to the point, you know, like I started to get very, very paranoid again. And I would see another white person in the supermarket and I'd be like flinching. And especially if I knew them, I'd just like flush red, start sweating, be hiding down the flipping, you know, toilet paper aisle just so I didn't bump into them and speak to them. So, you know, there was this very positive expansion, and then it started to contract again. And then there was other expansions as well later on, but it was not linear.
Wow. So teaching English, how long were you in China for doing this?
Like 9 years in total. Yeah, almost 10 years. So started in 2004, and then I did a 6-year stint up until 2010. Came back to UK, did my postgrad in the UK, and then went back to China. And I wasn't teaching English then, I was working in the embassy. So it was like 2 different stages of my career. First 6 years I was in China, I was there as like a student and an English teacher, getting my Chinese up. Again, setting my mind to something. I had a turning point there where I had no career options. I was like, I'm going to learn Chinese. So I just went very like OCD, got my postgrad, became the interpreter in the embassy, was like, you know, the linguist for the embassy. And yeah, so it was like the first 6 years was study. Then the next 3 years was working in the embassy.
Wow. What's it like working in the embassy?
Yeah, it was awesome, really awesome. But it also, that was another turning point. So the big turning points in my life, I would say, were like sort of 22 when I discovered psychotherapy. Then there was a rock bottom when I was in China, when I was like 24. Then the other big turning point was 32 when I was at the embassy, and it had brought my anxiety to such a point. I got on medication. So I was on 2 types of anti-anxiety meds. I was taking a beta blocker so that I could do my interpreting just for like performance situations. And then I was on an SSRI just for like everyday function. But I mean, it's an amazing place. Like I had such a good time there, and really good people. And it was interesting because there was a sense as well of like I was being re-socialized in a functional environment. Like all the people there were like Oxford graduates and Cambridge graduates, seemed to be like very confident from super secure backgrounds and stuff, high achieving, very securely attached people. And some of that felt like it was rubbing off on me. I felt like, you know, when you're a kid and you go around that friend's house who's got a really good family, I felt like I was there, like, you know, Monday to Friday, and it was doing me good. But at the same time, it was also scaring the absolute shit out of me, because there's high authority figures, the ambassador, the deputy ambassador. I mean, you know, even way, you know, it's a very hierarchical structure. So everybody was above me, more or less, when I first went in. So you're constantly feeling on edge because, you know, you're dealing with superiors and stuff. So it really brought my anxiety to a head. And that's when I had like my big turning point with tackling my anxiety.
Wow.
I was 32, yeah.
Just to circle back a little bit, like what did that rock bottom in China look like?
Yeah, sure, man. So it was, a very clear moment I remember really well. I'd got this job teaching in a language school. And for my first year in China, I'd been in this like top three middle school. We were sent there by the British Council. I had this huge apartment myself, like good pay, really nice package. Because, you're there under like the protection of the British, government basically, because it's a government scheme. And then after that finished, we were left to our own devices. So I found a job up on the northeast coast in a language school, and those things can be like pretty cutthroat. It was basically like a language mill where they try and extract as much English teaching from you as possible for as little money as possible. And the whole setup was crooked. The guy that was running it turned out to be like this drug addicted sort of small time Chinese gangster. He was really traumatized. He had a very, very complicated story. He was adopted by a Scottish alcoholic family, had this like long black ponytail, was just doing drugs all the time. And you'd go into the office and there'd be three of them in there with their cigarettes hanging out their mouths, just putting, bricks of money through money counting machines. And it's like everything running cash. And you're thinking, this doesn't look like a legit language school at all. Like, like why are you all counting out piles of money, like, on a Friday night in the office? Like, and he was selling us drugs and stuff as well. So the whole thing was very shady. And the guys that were there made me super uncomfortable. So it was like this one dude from New York who's like 300 pounds, morbidly obese. Like, I just felt uncomfortable being around him. Another dude was a very degenerate guy from Canada, like really overweight and just like not my kind of person at all. And then there was a guy who was like legitimately a pedophile who's like in his 70s and was just disgusting. So I've gone from this like really nice school in Chongqing to then coming up to this like dodgy language school with all these like, it was like the bar out of Star Wars. Do you know what I mean? Like all the lost guys. And I just, man, that feeling in your stomach when your intuition is like, this is not you. This is just so not right. So I walk home from there one night. It's like 9 o'clock, finished my class at 9 o'clock, dark and cold up on the coast, gets really cold up there. I'm walking home and then I just like sit on this bench. And I just remember that, I think everybody has this when you get to a turning point. Everything just it felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me. I just moved up here. I'd only been there about a week and I just feeling like so sick. I'm like, I can't flipping keep going there. Like, I don't want to be around those people. This is not me. And my mind's kind of just spinning, just like in free fall. And I'm like, what the fuck am I going to do? And then this is peak China growth period. So it's like 2005 at this point. And I was like, I can't go home. Like, there's nothing going on in England. I've got a crappy degree, Southeast Asian studies. I didn't even do well in it. I just scraped a pass basically because had all my own problems at that time. So I was like, I haven't got options in the career market. What am I going to do? Right. And I'm like, right. So I'm going to stay in China. And I'm like, right, but I need a focus. And I was like, right, okay, we're going to learn Chinese. And at this point, I had no inclination that I was good at languages or that I was into languages. I was just desperate to like cling on to something sort of that would give me direction. It was also quite wholesome really, because I was around these degenerate people. So I was like, right. And then next day went up to the bookshop and then I'm just sitting in this like tiny, like we've got loads of mice in this apartment. It's like a horrible apartment. I'm just on this rickety little table, just start copying characters out of this book. And then I'm like, right. And that just started the whole thing. And then I fell in love with learning Chinese and then ended up getting my postgrad and stuff. And then worked my way out of that job, got a job at a university, started to feel secure again because I was in a wholesome environment with good people and a nice structure. But that rock bottom moment, yeah, it was like 2005. Remember it really well. Just being in Qingdao, and just feeling like this is not me. I can't be doing this, man.
Wow, that's an incredible effort to work your way back.
Yeah,
that sense of security.
There's a lot of up and downs, man.
Incredible, and getting to that sort of level of Chinese where you are now an interpreter. Like, what was that like as an experience?
Amazing. Yeah, it's a really good question, man. It was life changing. Like, it really changed my life because I remember coming back to start my postgrad in UK and people that had just sort of treated me like a bit of a loser before. I remember like my friend's stepsister that I always had a crush on. Like, I tried to flirt with her and she just, like wouldn't give me the time of day because I was just a nobody, a very anxious nobody. now I'm coming back and I speak fluent Chinese, and they're like, oh, he's the guy that came back from China and speaks Chinese. And my mate would introduce me in the pub and be like, he can speak Chinese, like, so it gives you kudos. And I remember like I was interpreting in a hospital, and this doctor, like, who I look up to as having this cool skill set, he was like, what is a white guy like you doing speaking Chinese with the patients? And he's like, how did you do that? And I was like, blah, blah, blah. He's like, that's amazing. And then that really like landed with me, because I was like, bro, like, coming from this guy that I respect, and he sees me as having this skill that's kind of cool. And that was a big learning point. I was like, yeah, if you really put your mind to something and work for it, it raises your self-esteem, and it raises, how other people see you. And then I did the same with working out as well later on, because I was not in shape, and I saw how that changed me and my view of myself and how other people treated me. So that kind of light bulb went off in my head. It's like, oh yeah, if you apply yourself over a number of years to a difficult goal and get there, like, it really boosts your self-esteem.
Wow, incredible, man. So now that, you've experienced that, you've gone back to England then, and you've said you've spent many years living overseas.
Yeah.
So then what happened after that kind of phase? And...
Yeah, good question again, man. Bad times, basically. So a lot of my story, a lot of my life has been trying to rewrite stuff from the past, right? So I sort of like, I messed up university, and that really, because I was always an academic, and it stuck in my throat that I'd sort of fallen off and got into drugs and, hadn't achieved my potential academically. And I'd gone to a not very good university to do my undergrad. And now, because I'd worked so hard in Chinese and actually found something that I was really good at, I had good results, and I managed to get on a program at the University of Bath, which is like consistently a top 10 uni in England. And at that time it was in the top 5. So I was like, oh, sweet. Like, I'm going to put to rest the ghost of the past. So, went in and did my postgrad, and that year was really good. And I did well, and I studied hard, and I got a merit. So it's like, yes, screwed up my undergrad, but got this really good postgrad degree in Chinese interpreting and translation. And then after graduation, that was like, everyone had been like, oh, you're going to have the world at your feet and blah, 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 blah. And then there just weren't jobs. And, there was a Tory government in at that time, and they weren't giving funding to government agencies to have in-house interpreters. Everything was 0-hour contracts. And they were like, you can interpret over the phone for the immigration center, dealing with Chinese immigrants and stuff, for the Home Office. And they were just interpreting in the NHS, and it's all done through a third-party agency, and they're trying to like bill you per minute and stuff. They're giving you like 20p a minute, or it was just like really insulting kind of conditions that they were offering. So I'm already feeling disillusioned. I'm like, what the hell? Like, I studied 6 years and now there's no jobs. And then I ended up signing on, so I was like, signing on for the dole, where you get a government stipend of like 200 quid a week or whatever. So I'm like, been through all of this, like clawed my way back up the mountain, right? And then they're like, no jobs, basically unemployed, a couple of hours here and there interpreting in the hospitals. Just totally gutted, just more resentment towards the UK, more resentment towards home, just like kicked in my teeth again by my home country. And then I started looking for jobs back in China. And then that was difficult. I ended up getting an internship with the British Council, which were the people that sent me to China in the first place 6 years before that. But I'm like 30 at this point, and the other people that are starting this internship are like 21. It's for kids, and they charge, they pay you like a wage that reflects that, which is like pocket money. They're paying 150 quid a week. So I'm like a 30-year-old man doing this like kids internship, basically fresh graduates internship, feeling, flipping insulted and just a bit humiliated by that. So then I'm doing that, and then scrabbling. And then I find a freelance interpreting job, which is really good. It's a big project. And because other people aren't in need and aren't as desperate, I take up all of the workload for that and manage to stack like a good load of money. And I'm applying for jobs. And then finally I went for an interview at the embassy for one job, didn't get it. I think I might have done I was just desperate to get a job at the embassy. And I think I went for a couple, definitely one, and didn't get it. And then this job turned up. It was for a political officer. And it was like, you got to be fluent in Chinese and English. You got to have background in international relations and foreign policy. And I'm like, I could maybe wangle some of my undergrad into that. But anyway, I didn't have the international relations bit. So then I got an interview, and then I had to teach myself geopolitics, basically international relations, again, just going like 0 to 100, just reading everything I could over the next sort of couple of weeks or month leading up to this interview. Went in, nailed the interview. Like my Chinese was so good at that point because I was practicing so hard every day. Like, you know, beat off the competition from like bilingual Chinese people who had studied in private school in England and stuff, and got this job, which was just like a really good fit for me. So that was like a really nice period when that all changed, you know, like the hardship from doing freelance translation and then getting an actual in-house job. So yeah, so it was great for about a minute, and then like first day of work, and you just anxiety is just through the roof, just soaking my shirts through with sweat, you know, like even just having to go around the table and they're like, oh, this is the new guy, Ed, say a little bit about yourself. And I'd just be having a full like panic attack meltdown, you know, because I hadn't done anything like that since. I mean, I'd done some at postgrad. I'd done that, but it was just so triggering for me, man, being in that high stakes environment.
And how did you navigate it then?
Well, meds first.
Yeah.
You know, I went to go and see, we had really good medical insurance, and I went to see this doctor who was a really nice Kiwi guy. And I was like, I can't cope anymore, man. You know, like I'm going to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs on a daily basis. I have to interpret for diplomats. I can't hold my shit together. I'm losing it. I'm just anxious all the time. And he was like, yeah, I can give you this and this. So he just gave me these drugs, told me when to take them. And the beta blocker was like a miracle cure. So I remember I had to go up on stage and do a speech in Chinese in front of all these diplomats. And it was crazy because I could feel like my heart beating, but rather than being like up in my throat and making my voice shake, I could just sort of feel my heart beating. I was like, that's cool. And I went up and just, it was like that scene in The Matrix where he's dodging bullets. It was like time slowed down. I was making little jokes and looking around the room. It was just incredible. But I started to take it so regularly, there was just like diminishing returns, and I was taking more and more and just like necking a handful before I'd go into the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for a meeting. And then I remember this one point, I was like, this isn't even helping me. And I just feel really nauseous because they screw with your blood pressure as well, these beta blockers. So I had this realization of like, this is not actually working for me now. So had to come off the beta blockers. The SSRIs never worked for me from the get-go. They actually made me feel worse some of the time. Like there was a short period tapering on where I felt a bit euphoric. I even started smoking again and doing weird stuff out of character. And then it just did not help me. I didn't feel good on them at all. So I spoke to the doctor and started to come off them as quickly as I could. And that's when I had another big turning point. At that point as well, it was a bit of a crazy period because there's kind of a big drinking culture in those expat circles. So it'd be like Thursday night poker at one of the diplomats' house, lots of beers. Friday out with the boys because you've got like a group of friends there, ready-made like social group. Out Friday. And then it was a time when there was a lot of open air drug dealing actually in the bar district in Beijing, which was weird because all of that's been shut down, and China's obviously a very strict country with those laws. But there were people selling cocaine like on the streets around the bars, and I kind of fell back into those old patterns and was doing coke on a regular basis and drinking a lot. So got back into that. And then there was this one morning on a Monday, like after a bender over the weekend, and I'm in this shared apartment with two Chinese people and just kind of like wipe the fog, you know, because the bathroom was so small, just fogged up as soon as you turn a hot tap on or whatever. Just like wipe off the fog, look at myself and was like, I was just like embarrassed, you know. I was 32 and I just looked so bad. I'd like obviously rings around my eye, dark circles from being out on the coke and the booze all weekend, like really skinny fat, just looked terrible. And I think in my head 32 was always an age when you should be coming of age as a man. And I don't know where that is. Maybe I think I see it with my clients. A lot of my clients are 31, 32, 33, and I think it's just something in the collective subconscious maybe of like, this is when you should be maturing, you know. And also my dad was 32 when he had me, so that might also have been in the subconscious programming. But literally again, 0 to 100 that day I was like, this has to fucking stop. Like, this is ridiculous. So I didn't have a clue I didn't know what I should do, but I figured like getting in shape was going to be, I just thought gym. I had no background in physical exercise apart from rugby when I was younger. I'd never lifted weights, and I was like, I should go to the gym. So that lunchtime, I went up to California Fitness, which is in the shopping mall near the embassy, and just asked about a membership. And I remember being really scared about even walking in there, because it's like massive environment, all these like attractive women in their lycra working there. And I'm like, this is not me. This is not my place, So I was like, a lot of hesitation even going in there. And then that just started a whole another domino effect. That was like another big turning point, just committing to exercising. And it led to my whole transformation. And that's actually the transformation that I coach other people in my program, like starting with the physical reset and how that builds all this positive energy and changes things.
So in that reset, was it literally like night and day? Did you stop the partying and just solely focus on the gym?
No, because I remember I had a mate, a Canadian dude who was really into gym, and he was like, I wasn't totally off drinking at that point, but he was like, if you go out drinking, just try and like, he told me like you should walk as much as possible to like offset any calories from the alcohol. So what I'd do is I'd get a taxi to the bar, which might be a few miles from my house, get pissed, and then I'd walk home. I started to like walk home from the bar, which would be miles through Beijing. So it gradually, the booze was not night and day at all. But started to taper off. And then it was like, the more I read up on these bodybuilding forums, the more I got into nutrition, then I would stop having milk in my coffee and stop putting sugar in stuff. And like bit by bit, just educating myself and starting to learn how to eat properly. And then got to a point where I got so into bodybuilding, you wouldn't really think it now. I was like, I was different. I was bigger back then, and just like really into it as a thing. And they were saying, alcohol is like one of the worst things you can do, because it just, tanks your testosterone, ruins your sleep, your recovery. So it was like, the more I got into it, the less I drank. But I wasn't completely teetotal at that point. I was only fully teetotal after I crashed my motorbike in Bali.
Wow. Incredible, man.
Yeah.
So you're literally turning direction, you're reconnecting, you're focusing, and you're transforming at the same time.
Yeah.
Just purely through educating yourself. All these steps is about self-education.
Yeah, going deeper and deeper into rabbit holes.
Wow. And so from that point, when you started hitting the gym, you're on a new track. How much longer did you stay in China for then?
I stayed in China for another 3 years. So I started my job in the embassy 2012, and then I moved to Malaysia in 2015. So yeah, I was there for like a couple of years after I started this whole process of transformation.
Amazing. And then were you kind of happy to end that Chinese chapter, or?
Yeah, absolutely, man. So again, another big turning point, and it all came about from hitting the gym. Like, because I started to hit the gym, and then the next, so this is what I teach, and it's just such a logical process, like you hit the gym, and then the likelihood is you're not going to be like, oh, I want to go to Mackie D's, like you've done a hard session, and your body seems to crave better food anyway. So I was invested in my physical health and fitness, so I didn't want to eat trash. So I started to eat better. And then at the end of the day, I would just fall asleep. I've been doing heavy squats and stuff and like running on the treadmill. And that was a massive realization for me. I was like, oh, actually, I can get so tired that the anxiety doesn't take over. I can actually override the anxiety with physical exertion. And then I started to realize that a lot of my anxiety was also just excess energy. I'm a high energy person. I think a lot of the people that have anxiety and social anxiety, they are ADHD, high energy people. And if you don't expel that through swimming, running, lifting, whatever your thing is, it just goes up into the head and then just whizzes around up there and keeps you awake and stuff. So, I would work out at lunchtime, get a good feed, go home at night, fall asleep by like 9. I remember waking up and with that feeling of like, I don't even know where I am. Like, have I overslept? Is it the weekend? I feel so good. It must be Sunday, that kind of thing, like floating up out of a deep sleep for the first time. This is before Whoop strap or rings or anything. I wasn't tracking anything. I just knew like I was having better sleep and waking up feeling way better. The exercise led to nutrition and sleep. So it was all starting to order itself. And then I was waking up in a way better mood. I was in this positive mindset. And then that started the next thing, and that's how I got into overcoming social anxiety, because I had this excess of positive energy and I was like, what else do I need to work on? Like, I'm getting in shape and like, I'm feeling positive. Like, what else do I want to do? Like, what's the next thing? What's next? And this is what I see with people that I coach. Once the mind starts in that positive direction, you're like, what's next for me? What's next? What's next? As opposed to the opposite direction when you're in a downward spiral of like, oh, I can't do anything. Everything is too much.
Yeah, using that momentum to continually like create access from within and access what needs to be done.
Yeah, and it becomes very exciting as well. I would literally sit down and just like scribble down like a laundry list of stuff that I wanted to improve at or what was bothering me about myself. And, it was just a great feeling. It was like a big cleaning house from all these years. And it was like everything from leaving my socks on the bathroom floor, when I would come home from work, to like filing my taxes on time. It was like I was really just sick of my own bullshit. And I was like, and it was really exciting. That same kind of feeling like when you get your house tidied up and you start to clean one room, then you want to clean the next room, and it has its own momentum. And I started to just feel really good about doing this. And I was like, what's next? And I was like, I've always been scared of public speaking. I want to handle that. I've never had consistent success with dating. I want to handle that. Like, I want to do martial arts. I want to do just all these different things. So I was just working through this list.
Amazing. And similar to what you mentioned too with like the Zen and how all the dots were starting to connect. And you're connecting all these new dots. At that point too, did the Zen start to come back into your life?
Not so much. Like, I think I still had like a piecemeal practice of trying to sit when I could. But at this point, what I really remember is feeling like I discovered this whole universe, a completely separate, different universe called like personal development, which I'd never known about. And then it led to like productivity and like planning my day the night before and getting on top of stuff, meal prepping. And like, there's this feeling of like a very wholesome energy of like, I'm on top of my shit. I'm living how I should be, getting my, my stuff in order. And it felt amazing. So the Zen was not such a big part of my life at that time at all. And I guess if anything, I'd kind of fallen off my practice and I was just so focused really on like productivity, anything to do with self-improvement and all of this stuff, man.
Amazing. And so you're in Malaysia, you're really dialing it in, you're seeing these improvements. Then what continued to happen after that?
Yeah, so the transition to Malaysia was interesting because this is what I actually see as a natural progression, right? So the physical side of stuff started to get in shape, put on a ton of, mass very quickly. I went from like 70 something kilos up to like 85 kilos. People in the embassy were coming to me for like fitness advice and were like, oh, would you do a group exercise class, and all this stuff for people at the embassy and stuff. And I could just get this real world feedback of like, oh, this is, people are treating me very differently because you're someone who shows up every day, eats clean, has discipline that they probably want. So I could see how that was changing. Then I start working through all these things that have been bothering me, like the public speaking, the anxiety. And at this point, I didn't even have the vocabulary for it. I didn't know it was social anxiety. I just knew that I'd felt off my whole life. And I was, scared of speaking to attractive women, scared of speaking to groups of people, scared of doing public speaking, hated doing the Monday morning meeting, just all this crap that I wanted to take care of. So I was working through that. And then, because I was listening to a lot of podcasts which were about self-improvement and all of this, they were like, the next stage of evolution from working in a job that you don't want is finding your passion, finding your purpose, becoming an entrepreneur. So then I start looking into all of that, like what makes a good life. So I'm doing my life audit, like health, wealth, love, happiness, like my finances had always been a problem because I grew up in a scarcity environment and that was all linked to my self-esteem and lack of self-esteem and no one around. My dad was like a poor teacher with 3 kids and always struggling financially, and there was a lot of arguments in, you know, the family around money and all of this stuff. So I was like looking at all these different areas and how I could get them into order. And there was this talk of like entrepreneurship and, you know, the way you become, and also studying a lot of happiness as well, like what makes a happy life. And it was like mission, purpose, fulfillment. So, you know, if you look at like Maslow's pyramid, you know, hierarchy of human needs, it was like I was ascending, you know, I'd got my physical stuff in order, then I was doing work on myself. And then now it's like, where am I going in my life? Like, do I really just want to have this like desk job in the embassy? And I was like, no, that's not me at all. So drilling in, like, what do I want? What kind of person am I? Doing lots of personality tests, you know, like what would make me happy? And I'm like, it would be helping people, helping them with what, you know, like something that I've overcome. What have I overcome? And then I start drilling into that, but it was still half formed. I wasn't there yet. I wasn't at a place where I'd done my own work enough. But start looking into entrepreneurship, start reaching out to a couple of people in my network and extended network. Big shout out to Ian as well, because this is a guy that he was someone I taught English with way back in 2004. And a friend of a friend had said, well, if you're trying to like become an entrepreneur and, you know, improve your financial life and become successful in that area, Ian is someone who's just like had astronomical success, like in recent years working online. I was like, I'd lost touch with him. And, you know, all these podcasts were like, if you want to improve yourself and, you know, leverage your network, pick up the phone and make an offer to people. Be like, can I be of service to you? Can I offer something? Is there any way I could buy you lunch and learn what you're doing and learn something from you? So get back in touch with this lost connection. I'm like, bro, heard you're absolutely killing it. You know, I'm really fluent in Chinese these days. Would there be any scope, you know, would you need me to help you translate stuff into Chinese? Like maybe, you know, you could sell your products in China. And he's like, had this long conversation. He was like, there's no need for any of that. Why don't I just show you what I'm doing? And, you know, there's plenty of room in the market for you to try it yourself and maybe you can get involved. So opportunity comes up to move to Malaysia with a bunch of other entrepreneurs who are all in that space doing the same thing. So just took a leap of faith, was working out of a friend's office in Malaysia in KL with two other guys who had moved over from London, lifelong friends to this day. And that started the whole entrepreneurial journey. So that was like that was how the transition out of China came.
Wow.
Again, just another facet of personal development, you know, and being my own boss and solving problems for other people as the next stage of my own evolution, rather than just writing reports on foreign policy for the government in England, which I didn't believe, you know, I didn't even like the Tory government, and I didn't like the bullshit that goes on in diplomacy because it's all fake. And, you know, so.
Well, really taking that, you know, personal inventory before then taking that leap of faith.
Yeah, man. Yeah. And it was super exciting. You know, it was really, like I say, it's much like just all those things around the house that have been pissing you off, you know, like that flickering light bulb and the broken blinds and the fridge needs cleaning out, you know, because there's mold at the back. You know, all this stuff is there, but you let it slide and let it slide and let it slide. And then it gets to a point where you're like, I can't keep going on like this. And that's really what happened for me at that point.
And ultimately, like, you're raising your own standards of living.
Yeah, exactly. It's very much about self-esteem. And you don't even realize, like, you know, when I was trying to get more successful with dating, I had friends that were more successful. And they're like, bro, look, like, you don't even roll the sleeves of your shirt up. You just scrunch them up like that. And you got that crappy old Nokia phone. Like, what kind of message do you think you're sending to people? And I didn't even think about that, you know, like investing in a nice trim because I had hair back then and like good clothes. I didn't think about this stuff because that's your blind spot, because your self-esteem is low and you're like, oh, I just wear shabby clothes, whatever, I get by. So yeah, there's like awakenings as your standards increase and your self-confidence and self-esteem increases. And then you're like, oh, I could do this. I could level up my friendship group. Maybe this guy's actually a bit dysfunctional. Maybe he drinks too much. Maybe I shouldn't hang around with him. Maybe I should get around other people who are on a positive path, you know? So you keep scaling up and keep leveling up.
Amazing. I mean, how was that for you? So you're in Malaysia, you're surrounded by other entrepreneurs, you've taken this leap of faith.
Yeah.
This is an external reflection of the internal work that you've been doing.
Yeah.
Were you like a duck to water? Did you feel like this is it?
It was an amazing period. And what happened is like I hit the dating apps really hard, and then like went through a whole thing with that, and was, you know, I had good money coming in, really nice apartment, this group of friends, we were working together, we would go out in KL together, and there's a good, you know, we were young guys, like I say young, I was like mid-30s. And this is a part of my story which I've not really told on my own channel, and it's kind of too nuanced to go into, but like what happened is like the social anxiety had been handled pretty much at this point. Like I felt very confident, I felt good in myself, I was pretty jacked, you know, I looked good. I think men, that's kind of like your peak in a lot of ways, your mid-30s. So I felt great and I had money coming in. So a lot of areas of my life were handled. So threw myself into the dating scene and was partying quite a lot. And so social anxiety is no longer an issue, but then issues come in again around too much party scene. And then because of this group of guys that are online entrepreneurs, there's opportunities to go to like events in Orlando, events in Las Vegas, events in San Diego. Like, so we start traveling to America, and these guys have got money, and there's big parties being thrown at like, you know, the suites in Vegas and stuff, and there's cocaine, and like, so then these things start to come back up, you know. So it's like the social anxiety isn't there, but there's still issues around like lack of self-control around certain temptations and substances and stuff. So it was like a period of hedonism, like, and again, good fun, like, you know, popping bottles of champagne, you're in the VIP, there's girls, there's cocaine, like it was fun. I'm not going to lie, it was really fun, you know, but it's not part of the story that I've told too much. But, you know, so that went on sort of from 2015. I left, I went to Malaysia 2015, and then I joined the embassy joined the monastery in 2019. So 2015 to 2017 was like pure hedonism, more or less. And then I'd been dating this girl, and then we got more serious with each other, and then we started to work together online, and then we sort of removed ourselves from that scene, and we just locked in on what we were doing. And that's when I started to coach people myself. And we decided to really make a go of it. And she was very good with like videography and stuff. So we were living in Bali. She was shooting my videos. Our relationship was getting more serious. And and because she was allergic to alcohol, she couldn't really drink. So then the drinking really, really started to taper off. And then there was that one night out in Bali, which was like, it all came to a head. And that's when it stopped. So yeah, there was like a couple of years of like quite hedonistic good times. A lot of travel. I was like flying, because I had good money coming in passively. I was like just flying around for the fun of it, you know, from like LA to Japan to back to KL to Costa Rica to Egypt, whatever, just because I'd always wanted to travel. And so I kind of got that out of my system as well at that time. So there's a lot of travel, parties, whatever you want really. And then, yeah, sort of stepping back and being more serious about the coaching and that stuff from 2017 to 2019.
Wow. And so you just mentioned the monastery.
Yeah.
So what happened there?
Yeah. So it's quite funny telling this story because there's a lot of interest in turning points, I realized. So I'm in this committed long-term relationship with my girlfriend. She had been a flight attendant. So we used to fly quite a lot on her tickets and stuff, and then she was still a flight attendant actually at that point, and we had met up in Sri Lanka. So we were on a trip together. It was a little surf trip, although the waves were terrible. I brought my board over from Bali, and I'm driving this little rented truck around Sri Lanka, and I'm getting more and more furious with the traffic and the buses that keep like driving oncoming towards you, you know, to overtake. They'll just come into your lane, and this is winding me up, and I'm like slamming the horn, and then, you know, my girlfriend's saying stuff, and I'm sort of like, you know, you're not giving me the right directions or whatever. I'm like snapping at her, shouting at traffic, and something's sort of going off in my head. I'm like, bro, you know, you got your surfboard, you're doing everything that you thought you wanted. You got, you know, you're on these surf trips, you're traveling the world, you've got a really nice girlfriend. Everything is what you thought you wanted. And you're like, your behavior is quite ugly. Like, it's very impetuous, like short-tempered. And I was just not happy with myself as I'm driving around Sri Lanka. I'm like, this is not nice. I don't really like this guy. And the actual, like the power of the Dharma within Sri Lanka, because it's such a Buddhist country, it's like literally seeping into me. And I didn't really realize, what it means to, and how important it is just to have like monks and bookshops and stuff like that around, because it keeps lighting that thing up in your head of like, it keeps Buddhism like at the front of your mind. So we're driving around the lake in Kandy, and this is sort of going through my mind of like, I should be treating my girlfriend better. Why am I so bad tempered? I've got everything I want and I'm not happy, blah, blah, blah. And then it just catches my eye, these big, like 3-foot gold letters, and it just says Buddhist. And I don't have time to clock it properly. And I just like whack the indicator on, pull over, and it says Buddhist bookshop. And it's just this little like 1-story building or whatever. And just said to my girlfriend, I was like, I'm going to have to dip in here. Like, I really feel the need to go in here. And at this point, I'd already got a bit disillusioned with Buddhism. I thought enlightenment was not a real thing. I thought like if people had been doing it, it was maybe only the Buddha, and that had all finished a couple of thousand years ago. And I'd not been inspired by the monks that I'd seen and stuff, and the ones that I'd studied through my Southeast Asian studies and all this stuff. So I'd lost faith in Buddhism, and went in there. And there's just so many books. It's like a candy store, and it's so cheap as well. Because Sri Lanka's cheap anyway, and they're probably subsidized by the Buddhist Foundation or whatever. And I see these books by Ajahn Chah, and I knew from my classmate from undergrad that he was a famous Thai teacher. And there's a book called Meditations, and it's just got him sitting there. And this changed things a lot for me. So I start scooping up as many books as I can and start reading these books by Ajahn Chah. And he describes an experience that he has that for me sounded completely honest, like an experience of one of his enlightenments, and it starts winning me back over, or starts convincing me more of the possibility of enlightenment and changing your brain and your mind through meditation. And I just didn't see any reason why this like rural monk, 65-year-old rural monk from Thailand would make up a far-fetched story about this stuff. And I just start reading a lot of Ajahn Chah, and it really resonates with me. So, I mean, by the time we leave Sri Lanka, I've already just started to collect so many books from all these Buddhist bookshops, and even the airport is selling all this Buddhist stuff and like books and everything. And I'm starting to get my taste for the Dharma back, like I can definitely feel that fire is building back up in me. And I'm like, well, I've kind of touched all these things that I thought I wanted, like the relationship, the money, the car, the house, I'd done all these things very quickly because that's what my online business had allowed me to do. And then everything starts to point to Buddhism. It's like, well, there's something else. Maybe the problem isn't you're just accruing material stuff. So at this point, me and my girlfriend are renting an apartment in BGC, which is like the upmarket area of Manila. And I start doing my usual thing, which is like 0 to 100, throwing myself into like Buddhist practice. So she was an artist and was doing her own art at that time. So she would be like in the living room with all this artwork out on the floor doing her pieces, and I would be getting ready for bed. So I'd be going to sleep on the balcony on a yoga mat in a sleeping bag in Manila, like above all the jeepneys and stuff at 9 o'clock, so I could wake up at 3 a.m. And then I would do my walking meditation for a couple of hours in the living room, and then I would sit for a few hours because I'm already trying to follow the monastic guidelines that Ajahn Chah is talking about. So our lives then start to kind of diverge, because like she's getting up at 10 a.m. I've already been up for 7 hours by that point, like my day's like half done. She's, I'm going to bed at 9 p.m. She's just getting started on her artwork. And I'm just going deeper and deeper down this rabbit hole, just sitting more and more hours and really getting more and more convinced of like, this is what I need. And that enlightenment is a thing that can be done. It's a change that happens in the brain through consistent, committed practice, and if they can do it, why can't I do it? And this is, I've tried everything else to make me happy, you know what I mean, and it's not working. We've been doing business class flights and all this crap, and the whole like IG lifestyle, and I was getting worse in some ways, so yeah, this is what was going on. I was living the life of a monk in this apartment, and then I decided I wanted to go and find a teacher. So I went off to Japan, went to a couple of monasteries there, went to Burma, went to Thailand, went back to England, went to a Tibetan place in Scotland, started to see teachers from the Ajahn Chah lineage and stuff, and was looking for a teacher. And as it turned out, it was it was the second teacher in Japan who was actually the first, because I just went on like a little workshop in one of these monasteries. The first real teacher I encountered was the one that I ended up going all the way back to.
Wow.
Which is the one I didn't want to go to as well, yeah.
Wow. So you've done the reconnaissance, you've checked it out, and then what was the next step after that?
After going to the monastery in Japan,
Yeah.
I just wanted to get out of there. It was like terrible 2 days. I went in March, freezing cold. Like honestly, everything about there, I just thought these people must be mentally deranged. Like it's like, why would you? They were young dudes from Australia. Like I was like, this is so bleak, you know. And they're up at 3 a.m. and then they're out raking the gravel at 6. And I'm looking at them just like, you guys are like freaks. I was like, this is so. I was scared by a lot of it. I was like, these people are freaks. And then I ended up going there and absolutely loving it. So that is also funny. But yeah, so just couldn't wait to leave base. I went there for 2 days, was freezing cold. Just couldn't imagine anything more bleak. It's dark, it's weird, it's cold as hell. And then I went for a leaving conversation with the nun, who's the interpreter. She's like 70 odd years old at that point. And she was like, what's your situation? And I was like, well, I work online, work with my girlfriend. She was like, what's the situation with your girlfriend? I was like, we've been together a few years. And she was like, well, that's not going to work. Like if you're serious about doing this kind of training, girlfriend's got to go, work's got to, she's like, you got to have no other place to turn because it's going to be so uncomfortable here. If you have a more comfortable option, you're just going to go running off there. So you've got to go all in or not. And she, at that point, to filter people out, they were like, you either come here for 5 years or you just don't entertain it. So I remember feeling like I'd just been slapped in the face really hard because this is like my whole dream about being a monk or what, because that was still in there, right? Or doing this Zen training. So I just leave there and I'm like, really? Is it's not going to work? So then I'm going around looking for compromises. Like, is there a place where I could still have a girlfriend and then still go to the monastery for a few days a week and trying to hedge my bets, you know? And I'm looking around. And then went to a bunch of different places, did various sort of self-retreats and stuff at different places in Burma and Thailand and whatever. And then I can't even remember what the point was when I realized, but I was like, that guy in Japan, like he's the only place with the real teacher. Like everywhere else had nice infrastructure, nice monasteries, nice food and stuff like that. And I was like, no one's getting it done. That place really was legit. And a guy from Brisbane who'd been training there, he was like, the Roshi, you know, the teacher here, they call him the Roshi in Japan. He's like, the Roshi is the real deal, you know? And at that point, I'd had no contact with him. No newcomer gets to have contact with the Roshi. You have to build up to that. And he said to me, when you go and see him, he'll look through you clearer than glass. He'll, you know, and I was like, wow. And this is a guy who'd been there, similar background to me. He had problems with meth and different stuff, you know, so he was someone I could relate to. And he'd been there 18 months already, and the training was really working for him. So big shout out to Ben Boot. But yeah, so that stuck with me, and I went and all of this stuff is all just ringing in my ears as I went around looking for places. And then I came to this realization, if I'm serious about this, then it's going to be there. I'm going to have to do it there. And that was it.
So how long does it take for somebody to get their life in order to be able to then renounce everything and step into a monastery?
Yeah, that's a good question as well. So at some point, me and my girlfriend, so I bought a property in the UK, and me and my girlfriend were living this kind of like domesticated life back there for a bit. Got the BMW, all this, you know, golf clubs and tennis rackets and gold jewelry and like, you know, all this crap. And this is like, so we left there in September. So we went to the Philippines in September. So there was a good few months, and she was amazing as well. Like she helped me sell all my stuff. She knew what I was planning. And so we just started to sell everything off, sold the BMW, sold all my stuff on Facebook, signed up with an agency for them to rent my apartment out to tenants. And then me and her moved to the Philippines because I was due to start in Japan in November. So from September to November, I was with her and her family in the Philippines. So I would say like as quickly as you can sell your stuff off, really. Like it took me sort of 4 months, to do that, 3 months maybe. But basically just sold everything. I knew it was going to be cold as hell. So I went to a camping shop, got the best sleeping bag I could. I knew I was going to be doing manual labor. So I got the best pair of boots I could get for like digging trenches and all the stuff that you do in a monastery. And then got my shit together, went to the Philippines, flew from the Philippines to Japan, and just rocked up with this backpack and this sleeping bag, stepped over the threshold, which is this massive wooden gate, 330-year-old wooden samurai temple built by the samurai clan, just like something out of a movie. Like I can't even explain how incredible this place is. Walk over there on the 9th of November 2019, and that was it. Entered and then didn't leave again until March 2023. Wow. So yeah.
Just before we get into that, what is a conversation like with your partner at the time, when the way that it looks is saying like, hey, this is what I'm embarking on, and knowing that there is, that disconnection?
Yeah. It was very difficult because it was all happening when we were living together in this apartment. Like we had this, like I say, in BGC, and it just became more and more apparent that we were like just living on parallel tracks, And I remember we were watching a movie on the bed, and it was a movie about the life of Dogen, the Zen master. Obviously, it was my choice. And she's been brought up in a Filipino evangelical background. So there's like I'm not into that at all. I don't believe in any of that stuff. So there's like a philosophical disconnect or whatever. And we're watching this movie about Dogen, which I thought was amazing. And they start doing these like bows, these elaborate like prostrations. And then she sort of like jokingly says to me, but it was kind of like a barbed comment. She was like, oh, you're going to go to Japan and do that? As if like you're a weirdo. Like, why are you going to do that? And it was just like the tone of that comment. And that kind of like marked our relationship was kind of souring like at that point, because I knew exactly what I felt I needed to do. And she kind of obviously didn't really fully see the value in it or understand it. It was just hard for her to even understand, I guess. And, we're still technically together, but I'm going around the world to all these monasteries and would come back and see her and whatever, right? And obviously there's still a lot of love between us, but we're just disconnected. We're just starting to go on totally opposite paths at that point. So we sit, we talk about what the plan is, and I feel like, she kissed me goodbye at the airport and all of that stuff and was like, I support you. But I think she was in denial about this, like completely. I think she thought he's going to go there. It'll be a 6-week thing. Like, let him get it out of his system, or, he's going to try this out and then he'll be back or whatever. I don't think she had fully accepted that this was going to be the end of the relationship. So we were still, you can still have some contact with the outside world. You have access to the internet, like very occasionally. Like, so I think after about 3 months, like I checked my Gmail, and she's messaged me and she's still supporting me. And I was estranged from my family at that time. So she was in charge of a lot of my affairs of like, if anything, if there's a problem with the apartment, the rental agency, she's the point of contact. So we were still very, very close, and there was still a lot of shared stuff between us. And then COVID hit, and that messed up her life, and I just had no idea what was going on. So, for her on the outside, so we're still in contact very occasionally via email at this point. And then there was a conversation on the phone where I was like, you do realize like, this is me now for the foreseeable. Like I don't have any plans to leave. And, that, I think that was a turning point for her when she realized like, this is for real kind of thing.
Wow.
So if I'm totally honest, it was way harder for her, because I think in my head, I just had this real calling for what I wanted to do. And it wasn't that I didn't love her, but I felt like it naturally run its path for me. And I think that's often what happens in a relationship, right? It's rarely like you both just come to a nice, neat amicable point where you're like, yep, I think we're both good now. It's a little fist bump and see you later. It's like there's usually one party still wants more, and the other person is having a change of direction and feeling, and that was me.
Wow, very honest.
Yeah.
And so you've walked through these 100-year-old gates, and now you've stepped into it. You're fully committed. I mean, what is life like in a monastery?
Yeah, pretty brutal, to be honest, to begin with. Like they say the first period is you're just trying to do schedule. You're just trying to adjust because you're used to so much comfort, and your circadian rhythm's totally different and all this stuff. So the official schedule in a monastery is like the wake up light goes on and the wake up bell. Like someone comes around, they come around shouting to wake you up at like 3:20. Then you need to be in the main hall by 4 a.m. There's a morning service where you chant sutras and stuff. That goes on till 5. Then there's Sanzen, which is your morning interview with the Zen master, which is the Roshi. That's around 5:30. Then there's meditation. Then there's more sutra reading. And then there's breakfast at 7. Then you go outside and clean the grounds. Then you do inside cleaning inside the spaces like the meditation hall, the ceremonial hall, all of that stuff, the toilets, everything. It's kind of, when you first come to a monastery, you're known as donai, which means inside the zendo, because it's like the zendo is the meditation hall, and donai means inside the zendo. And that's like, you're like grunts, you're like infantry grunts, and you're expected to like slop out the toilets. You all live in the meditation hall, and you all sleep on the tatami there on mattresses and little futons. And there's really good camaraderie as well. So it was a group of like 8 or 10 of us all together, like very much like a brotherhood vibe. You're all going through this shared adversity. So one part of it is like, you're trying to just like get enough sleep and get enough food. And then another, and trying to deal with the cold, because like November was cold. And then the other part of it is you're actually trying to do practice, and you're trying to figure out what is this Zazen stuff and what does the Roshi want from me? And that's a whole nother thing, trying to actually deal with the Roshi, because he's just like scaring the shit out of you. He's a constant source of stress in your life, so there's different parts to it. And the first part, you see the new guys coming in and they're just trying to figure out how many layers they can wear to get through, when can they get another feed in, and like you're just thinking like food and sleep to begin with, and then quickly your body adjusts. And this is why I'm such a big advocate of like more ancestral patterns for how humans live, more community, early nights, early wake ups, this fluctuation between cold and hot, like your body temperature drops at night because it's so cold, and then you sleep really deep. We would only sleep from like 10 till 3, but you would often feel very rested. Like your energy is so different because you're not losing your energy on the phone. You're recycling your energy through Zazen, like you're in Chinese, they call it shouqi, like you're pulling all your energy in rather than leaching it out. So you start like charging around like you're fucking pumped up on coke and stuff like that, to be honest, which is not something you hear monastics talking about. But like Rinzai practice is this really like gung-ho energetic practice. And it's like, the Roshi is, he's like 85. He's just like this ball of testosterone, basically. It's very funny. It's not what people imagine monastic practice. It's not this quiet, like Theravada practice, It's like very full on, because it's all about your energy. It's about ki. And he can tell where your ki is at from how loud you shout and how fast you run and how sharply you do stuff. It's like, there is some similarity between the state of mind you would get from doing cocaine and Rinzai practice, because it's just sharp, no extraneous thinking, totally focused, just like really pumped up.
So it's kind of like the Roshi is gauging on whether you are harnessing your full potential of energy.
Yeah, exactly. He's reading your ki. Like, is your ki high or low? So you'll go in and he'll be like, show me your meditation. And there was, I won't give examples, but let's just say you go in and you do a shout and it's all from your head. It's like, and he's just like, get the fuck out of here. Like he'll ring his little bell, just totally dismiss you. And then the guys you can hear who are getting it, they're because the energy is changing in the body, you'll hear a noise come out of the Sanzen room, which sounds like, it doesn't sound like a human.
Wow.
And when you do it, it's beyond anything that you could do, because it's not you. It's like all this energy just goes like, whoa, and it just like explodes out of you.
Wow.
And I mean, who would think that's what monastic training is? Like, people don't know you're going into this like little darkened room over a wooden bridge with this little Yoda dude at 9 o'clock on a Friday night, and then you're yelling at him and he's yelling back at you, and he's like, yeah, it's like fucking crazy, man. And I loved it because I think it tapped into, it does attract people who are on the extreme side of things, people who've done extreme sports or been into extreme drugs and stuff, because they have a taste for those extreme experiences. And you're probably not going to get any more extreme experience in your life than living with a bona fide Zen master like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's wild.
Absolutely. So then, you talk about the camaraderie. So you've got this group. Just for clarification, out of the amount of people who came in, how many people would leave?
Like revolving door, man.
Okay.
Mental breakdowns, people problems with health because of the cold.
Okay.
Just lack of, unless you really want it, unless you've got a strong amount of desperation, that's why it is so grueling, because it's meant to filter out the wheat from the chaff. Like the guys, traditionally, people that would go to these monasteries, they've got to go there with this like burning desire to be enlightened. Otherwise, there's no point being there, because you cannot half-ass something like that.
Yeah.
So they make it as uncomfortable as possible. So if you're going there to avoid the farm or to get a free meal or whatever it would have been back in the day, it's like, no chance. I'd rather just be a beggar. I'd rather go and live under a bridge, So it's brutal. I saw guys have become mentally unstable. I saw 2 guys have sort of, let's say, sort of like psychotic episodes or splits. Guys just, go off crying because it's too cold. Your feet split, your ears split, your hands split because of the chilblains. It's uncomfortable. So massive turnover. Like guys that stay longer than a year or two, it's a small percentage.
Wow. And so did you have those guys that you could look up to?
Yeah.
So, and use them as the guidepost?
Yeah. So they're your senpai, and everything in Japan is very hierarchical. And big shout out to Jiko. She was a very, very inspirational Polish trainee there. Like, she was never ordained, but she did 10 years there.
10 years.
So she went, it's all about, in Zen, they talk about your vow and the depth of your vow. And she had been through some crazy stuff in her family life, and had a very, very strong vow to get enlightened. And there were other guys, around me, just very good examples of the practice and how you should navigate that kind of system and container. So that's super important, having real senpai that you can look up to.
Wow. And then obviously over time, you then became that for others?
Yeah. And it's a beautiful thing as well, because as, Jiko left and she went back to Europe, and then we move up the hierarchy, and the form, they call it the form, just becomes ingrained in you. And I was never very good at that. I was not a form guy. I was there for the experience, but even so, even when you're not great with the form, it just, you hear a bell and you do something. You don't even realize why you're folding your robe at that time. But it's just, everything is like Pavlovian conditioning. Wow. So then you become the senpai for other people. Yeah.
Incredible. And so did you leave the monastery at all within those years?
We would go only to go downtown to renew our visa.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. And then now and again, sometimes we would actually have a group excursion, because you do so much sitting. So it's actually a thing in Japanese monasteries to go to a bathhouse together and get have a steam and sit in the onsen. So sometimes we would have a time to go and refresh our bodies and go to the onsen and go to the sauna, because it puts a lot of stress on your body. So apart from that, no, it was just 3.5 years in the monastery pretty much.
Wow. And so you said that was over the period of COVID too.
Yeah, during all of COVID. So I had no idea what was going on with COVID. We just thought it was this cute little thing that was going to blow over. They're like, oh, is it something called a coronavirus? And we were like, yeah, whatever that is,
So after 3.5 years in the monastery, what was one of your biggest takeaways from that experience?
That I'd been living my whole life in a conceptual world of thought. Like that. And that was a really crazy realization that you can live your whole life in mental abstraction, and you're sort of, even when you're driving the car, when you really need to be rooted in reality, you're still just on autopilot. And unless you do some kind of training that really makes you present and brings you into the real world where you are right now, you can live your whole life way more in thought than you are in reality. And that's what I'd been doing.
Wow.
So the kind of insights and breakthroughs were like very profound, but very simple. Just like, oh shit, I'm here. This is this, you know, like, and you start to actually see the distinction between all of the mental masturbation you do on a daily basis and actually living real life. Like, it feels different. Like, colors are different. It's more vibrant. There's this, and this is another thing. I think people think Zen training is about like, oh, blissful serenity. Like, there was nothing serene about my training. It was like, you know, slopping out cess tanks and being shouted at and screamed at and being cold. And it's very energetic and hectic and grueling. But it's so alive. Like, when you do proper Zen practice, even when you sit Zazen, you're not just sitting there zoning out. Like, everything becomes your Zazen. Like, there's no distinction between the activity and everything around you. Like, so there's this sense of like real aliveness that comes out of it, which is something you don't really know about unless you start sitting a lot of Zazen, you know, like.
Well, I mean, ultimately, like, you know, human beings are so disconnected in this day and age. So it's like when you're connecting to exactly and only the present moment that you're existing within.
Yeah.
And it's like, it is pure aliveness.
Yeah. And that's what the Roshi's listening for. Like, how much you're getting out of the way and letting this universal energy, which we can all tap into, just come through you, whether it's through a sound or an expression or whatever it is. Because we drain our battery by just constantly being in our heads or looking outside of ourselves, or just he used to say there's nothing more draining than thinking. So that's what kills your energy. So he's an energy guy. Rinzai Zen is an energy practice.
Wow. So then how is that for your own personal self-reflection of seeing like all the ups and downs that you'd experience within your life, and also to suffering from such social anxiety? And then how was that to reflect on?
It just makes me think I've made my own life very difficult for myself. You know, there's not much middle ground. You know what I mean? It's been a life of extremes up until this point. Does that answer your question? Is that
for sure? It's beautiful because it's like not only was the monastery yet another extreme, but it's like simplified everything to be able to conceptualize the experience.
Yeah, and it kind of gives you one takeaway for everything in life, which is just always bring it back to what's real, like what's happening, like right now. Yeah. You know, like not getting too trapped up in your head.
Yeah, definitely. Which is so powerful about, you know, Buddhist philosophy being that the key takeaways are so simple. Yeah. But it takes a lifetime to realize that.
Yeah, exactly. Really simple, but not easy.
So you've just spent 3.5 years in the monastery.
Yeah.
What was your decision to leave?
Yeah, so that was complicated as well. So basically around that time, I'd started to get back in touch with my family because we'd been estranged for a lot of COVID. And then it turned out like my dad was struggling a lot caring for my mum because she'd got cancer, and then she had had issues with drinking and addiction and unprocessed trauma herself. And then this had kind of escalated into full-blown alcoholism during COVID. So she was sort of getting hospitalized frequently because she'd been falling down drunk and breaking vertebrae in her spine and breaking her collarbone and like really smashing herself up, and just, you know, drinking to excess on a daily basis. So my dad was like really burned out. And in all honesty, I was also getting quite burned out from the training. And it seemed like a good juncture. And in hindsight, I think your intuition leads a lot of decisions. And if I'd stayed any longer, I feel like I could have started to get institutionalized. And if I hadn't left then, I would not have wanted to start the work that I've been doing over these last few years, building my coaching practice. I wouldn't want to start that at like 50 or whatever. It was really, really the right time. So it was a kind of like a dual decision. Like I myself was I was having problems physically because of the cold. Like it was causing me problems with my body. And I just finished one winter and I had to consider, am I going to go through another winter like that? Because I mean, it's super intense. Like, and then basically my dad needed some respite. So I went back to the UK, looked after him while he's looking after my mum, who was going through chemotherapy and drinking all the way through chemo. So yeah, that was the reason, man. You know, things had really got bad in their situation at home. I'd been absent for that amount of time, so it was a chance to go back to the UK, reconnect with them, and also, you know, in hindsight, that my training was done for then. You know, I definitely don't discount doing monastic training later in life, but for me, that was the right time to leave.
Wow. So then you returned, and then how long did you spend with your family?
So I was back in the UK from May 2023 until October 2023.
Wow.
Yeah.
Then how did you end up making your way out this way? Is that...
Yeah, so that was interesting. So it had come to a point where I'd come back from the monastery and people were just naturally reaching out to me through old videos that I had on my YouTube channel, and I wasn't planning to do anything with that, but I was still taking calls from people, just giving them some free advice and some free help. And then it got to the point where I'd stopped off at a yogic ashram in India for a month to do some work on my body because I had a lot of problems from all the sitting. I'd got sciatica, and doing this yoga practice had really helped with that. So I was very interested in yoga, and they had offered me a free year-long training in like all the yogic practices. They were going to teach me Sanskrit for the chanting and pranayama and asanas and all of this stuff. And because of my monastic background, they were like, oh, you'd be a real asset to the program. So it's like this amazing year-long program. And they had accepted me on that. And then it came time to confirm my place on this program in India or do something else. And again, intuition, I just felt like I've just done 3.5 years in a monastic environment, going to basically another monastery in India, up in Rishikesh, you know, foothills of the Himalayas, doing this, shutting myself off for another year. I was like, I don't think that's the move now. And I was already getting this calling to start helping people again with the coaching. So I was like, okay, I need to leave the UK, want to start doing coaching again. Where do I go? And my plan was, my Chinese language had lapsed. So I was like, I'll go somewhere where I can brush up on my Chinese. I love Taiwan. So I was like, I'll go to Taiwan. So I went back to Taiwan, stayed in Taipei for 6 or 7 months. Bunch of earthquakes started to hit Taipei, started to feel like that's not the safest place to be. Was thinking about going back to West Bali, going back up to, what's that place? What we said? Medui, yeah.
Medui, yeah.
Yeah. So I was thinking about going back up to Medui. And then, you know, algorithmically, people who search Medui also search Da Nang, apparently. So I started to get videos fed to me about Da Nang. Just watched a couple of videos and was like, that looks amazing. So just booked myself a flight sort of on spec from Taipei to Da Nang to have a little look and see what it's like. Really loved it. Yeah, I just ended up staying here. I've been here for 2 years.
Wow, incredible. So, I mean, thank you so much for sharing your story. Before we go into the next chapter, just to kind of wrap it up. So you're a coach, you work online, you've brought all of your life experience and also all the training and experience from the monastery, and you deliver this into your work and your offering to the world.
Yeah, absolutely.
Incredible.
Yeah, and there's a very nice quote he's a senpai. He's an American guy that was a monk at our monastery, and he wrote a really nice blog post where he said, try to figure out how you can make your life an offering to the world. And you know, up until I sort of stumbled onto the idea of helping people with what I'd been through. It had been like a blot on my past. You know, I was like, why couldn't I just be normal? Why couldn't I have had a normal upbringing? You know, why did I have to go through that stuff? And why did I have to feel so different to other people? And then, you know, this idea of like making your mess your message, rather than trying to sweep that under the carpet and make out like I'm just a normal person and I've had a normal life and all of that stuff. I was like, I can own it and turn this into something to offer other people. And it's been amazing. You know, I was on a call with someone prior to us chatting here, and you know, I'm talking to a guy who's exactly where I was in terms of age and where he's at in life when I was going through that stuff. And it's like, that's the gift that I have now, that I know, you know, it's like, I know where you're at, man. Like I know the path out of there because I've done that and I've been through it, and I can see how impactful that is for people who feel very lost and don't know what's wrong with them. They think they're the only person that's like that. And then I'm able to say, it happens to a lot of people, man. And this is how you get out of it. And you're not alone. And I've been through it. And I feel, actually, it's weird. You know, I feel blessed to have been through everything that I've been through, because it all informs the work that I do.
Incredible. Ed, thank you so much for sharing your story. Incredibly powerful. At this stage of the podcast, we then go into your medicine. So what has been your medicine, or one of your greatest teachers throughout your experience and story?
Yeah, that's hard, you know, because I feel like each transition phase in my life has kind of been characterized by different teachers. I mean, as soon as you say medicine and teacher, I would have to say the Roshi. You know, I think living and training with, you know, someone who's given themselves so completely to Zen training, and to even just be around someone like that is a form of medicine and a form of healing in itself. And yeah, I mean, that was very healing. I remember one particular Sanzen, he said to me, like, you're starting to see what you're capable of now, and you're not tripping yourself up as you have been. And he'd never said anything like that to me. He'd never said anything that personal. And I realized that he had seen exactly who I was all along. And I think, you know, like having the love from him, because there was, you know, you do feel love from a teacher like that. That was a kind of medicine in itself. The faith that he had in me, and the position that he gave me in the monastery, and the amount of energy that he poured into me because he believed in me and he felt that I had what it took. Like, my Japanese name is Ryotatsu, and it means he who has what it takes to see the training to the end. And that's what he saw in me. And I guess that's maybe what's important as a coach, you know, like, to have someone who believes in you is very powerful and very healing in its own sense. So, you know, when you mention teachers, immediately my mind, you know, goes to the Roshi, and I think that's been a very healing experience to have someone like that in my life. And I still go back. I try to go once a year, you know, just to spend time with him, and you know, there's still that connection there with him, which is very, very special. I mean, I think the other medicine, I would say hitting rock bottom is a good kind of medicine. Like, you've got to get to desperation is a good medicine, you know, like you've got to sit in a dark place at some point, you know, like if you're half-assing it and soothing yourself with medication or porn or alcohol or marijuana, whatever it is, you're never going to make the change that you need because you can't feel it. You know, you're numbing yourself out. So whether it's monastic training or wanting to transform yourself physically or mentally, like, you need a good, healthy dose of desperation, I would say. So I think that's been a good teacher. And I mean, really also, like, I've benefited so much from an amazing amount of resources that are out there. You know, like there's a part of the program that I teach my clients, which is reconditioning. And it's trying to turn your mind from this kind of paranoid, pessimistic, self-hating place into something that's much more supportive, nourishing, loving, positive, focused on positive aspects. So, you know, like teachers like Martin Seligman from Positive Psychology, you know, just so many good quality podcasts and free resources that you can access that are out there for people. If you're serious about transformation, that you can dive into, you know, like.
Incredible. Thank you so much, Ed, for sharing your story, and also now and guiding, supporting, and teaching others to walk their path.
Yeah.
And is there a way that people could reach out to you if they want to connect and learn more about what you offer for the world?
Yeah, for sure, man. So I'm Ed Barton, the social freedom coach on YouTube, and also at edbarton.coach on Instagram. They can connect with me there.
Amazing. Ed, thank you for your time.
Man. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. Cheers, mate.
Pleasure. Wow. What a story. When I was sitting with Ed and I was listening to what he was sharing, particularly in the beginning, it really struck me how one decision that was made in hopes to better the opportunities for the family, actually created a spiral of detriment, and how it impacted 3 lives so individually. One that didn't make it much past their early 20s, and the ripple effect that one decision can have and the strain it can put on the foundations of a relationship, and also the development of individuals. But of course, if I put myself in their shoes, I mean, you'd only be making those decisions to create better outcomes and to pursue these potential opportunities. And I guess we all know as individuals, you don't ever truly know what's going to be on the other side. And the thing that really stood out to me the most hearing Ed's story was just his innate ability to be able to tune in and know when there was a redirection and when to redirect. But not only step onto that path with an idea or a hopefulness, it's with the conviction and the perseverance and determination, to go from a perceived identity to then a golden boy image, and through creating through the discipline. Because at each and every fork in those roads that I listened to, it was a remarkable amount of discipline that was implemented to pave a new path. And the contrast was so dynamic that hearing the story really felt like many moments of day and night, and the learnings and the teachings within those. And there was, from what I heard, interwovenness of choices and substances and essentially coping mechanisms in order or hopes to curb that discomfort. But fundamentally, it was fueling fires that of introspection and using different points in the road as cornerstones for that self-reflection. And the tapestry of that story, to me, was quite remarkable, how there were so many different points of leaving, returning, coming and going, not only externally but internally. And also expansion within the mind, expansion within the heart, but then also external expansion, cultural expansion, and developmental expansion. That was something that really inspired me in the way of that truth that can come from self-actualizing and being determined to achieve or to rewrite. And the most interesting part about the story that Ed shared was how the deep learnings and teachings came from the time in the monastery and having guidance through support, through the right systems. And of course, this is, absolutely admirable in the way of choosing to go to a monastery and those conditions, and choosing to be away from comfort, all types of comfort, renouncing all comfort for a greater introspection. And as I briefly shared in the podcast about those Buddhist teachings and philosophies, it is really so simple at the end of the day, but it is incredibly hard at times to execute and to maintain. So I can relate through parts of my own practice and self-discovery of what it takes, and also the power of teachings and support, and that full circle in Ed's life and experiences to then end up in a monastery and to actually ground so deeply in those simple teachings, and how that is then rippled into his life and into the work that he does for others. I love the part at the end there where he really owned his story and was proud of every part of it, that it was uniquely his and that nothing is regretted. In fact, everything is being considered and deeply grateful for. And I see that in the modern day teachers. The true authentic teachers are the ones who have really walked the path, not just claiming that they have actually done it. Because as Ed said, you know, there is so much reverence when one has been to the darkest places of their soul and they have seen the shadow. They have confronted the shadow. Because ultimately, it is what most people are running from. And so when somebody has taken the time to not only be with that, but understand it and make amends within themselves so it doesn't show up, or at least they can self-soothe and recognize when it is showing up, then I believe that that is what opens the doors to leading the way and guiding others. Because how can one truly ever talk the talk if they haven't walked the walk? I think Ed is a perfect example of that. And he knows, and most people know, that the work is infinite. And it's one that, when connected to authentically, there's a trust within that. And there's a surrender, which is one of the most important tools to bring on a path of introspection. So I'm very grateful for my time with Ed and the journey that he's been on and all the points of reference and experience he's had, and not only has, but has experienced to bring into the world, into his offerings and to what he shares. And to have simply just had the moment in time to be able to hear that story firsthand. So thank you to all that listened, and to Ed for sharing an example of what can be overcome, what can be learnt from, and what can be embodied in a world where we are trying to ultimately figure out and find our way. So once again, I thank Ed for his story and for his time. So there you have it. Though while losing himself in the process, Ed chose to continue to walk a path to true inner stability. I appreciate that Ed never gave up and gets to support others on their journey. If you'd like to check out his work, head to @edbarton.coach and The Social Freedom Coach on YouTube. For all other information about this podcast and the work I do supporting men's mental health, head over to plumplanes.com, @plum_planes_collective, or Plum Planes Collective on YouTube. Also, would love to hear from you, so please feel free to leave a comment or a rating if this or any other episodes connected with you. My name is Taylor Jardine, and this is Your Story, Your Medicine. Thank you for taking the time to listen.